Howdy, y'all. Well, we took it apart. We got the timing belt on. We got the new water pump on. My new parts have came. Let's put it back together. And we are by no means giving up on the D4. This one's just been sitting for a few years till I had the nerve to work on it. You might be wondering why I haven't put this thing back together, and that's because I'm waiting for a part. This tab was broken off, and this timing belt cover was broken off here. I'm going to go ahead and replace it. This is not the kind of thing that I want to come apart and get inside that timing belt and tear things up. I had that problem on an old Jetta TDI once, and I don't care to repeat it. And for the record, that was the last time I trusted a shop to do anything on any of my cars. Got my new lower timing belt cover in the mail yesterday. And this is the one that we're replacing because this tab is broke off up here. But I've noticed that these both have a crack right here in the same place. I'm going to take a little super glue just to shore that one up and we'll get it installed. Judging by the fact that these are both cracked in a similar location, this looks like a common problem. I'm going to give everything one final inspection to make sure it's correct. I've rotated the engine several times. And remember that you have to do it 2 evolutions to make sure that things lined up, because this gear is bigger than the one on the crank. Looks like everything's okay. All the bolts are in, everything's torqued, and we're ready to put the cover on. Now we can install our lower timing chain cover. I'll be using a T30 Torx to tighten the 7 bolts in the bottom cover. Now the bottom timing belt cover is installed. I find it much easier to leave the top part of the bottom part of the cover loose so I can get the top part in. Once in place, you can tighten the remaining 4 screws. Be sure to tighten the ones that we loosened to make the top part fit. The timing belt cover bolts are going to torque to about 10 Newton meters, which is roughly 7 foot-pounds. Using a 6mm hex, we're going to install the harmonic balancer next. There's a dowel pin in the crankshaft that goes right there to get it lined up. You want to pay close attention to make sure you get it in the correct place. If it's installed correctly, you should see that pin right between the bolt holes. With all the bolts installed, we can torque them to spec. I'm going to torque those to about 10 Newton meters plus about 90 degrees. Okay. That's all 6. I've finished them off at about 25 Newton meters. Next, we'll be reconnecting this coolant line. Next, we'll be reinstalling the serpentine belt tensioner. And you'll want to make sure that your engine lifting bracket is facing this direction, towards the engine. And snug up the 3 13mm bolts. Torque to 23 Newton meters, which is roughly 17 foot-pounds. I'll be replacing the serpentine belt with this genuine VW Audi belt. You'll want to route your belt around the crank pulley, straight down across on the bottom, around the smog pump, around this idler, over the power steering pump, and leave a loop right here so that we release the tension, we can loop it over the alternator. To release that tension, you can use a 17mm wrench. Careful not to get your fingers underneath. Okay. You'll want to inspect your belt all the way around to make sure that everything is in the grooves and aligned properly. And everything looks good. Next, I'm going to reconnect my intercooler hose right here. For that, I'll be using a 7mm socket with a long extension. For the next step, I like to gather up all the loose items to ensure they're not in the way. We're going to move the front grille back out of the service position. These are going to be a T30 Torx. There's 2 here. 2 on the other side, 1 down below, and 1 down below here on the other side. If you loosen the cooler bracket down below, don't forget to tighten it up now. Before I tighten anything up, I'm going to install the crash bar next. Using a 10mm socket, I like to install the nuts at the top of the crash bar next. Install the 3 13mm bolts. Install the 3 on the other side. Once you have everything started but not tight, I go ahead and start at the top and go down to the bottom and snug everything up. I like to try and match the marks from the previous installation. There's no specific torque specs for the crash bar, so I just snug them up tight. Next, I'll reinstall the horn, and we'll want to face this to a similar orientation to the one on the other side. You may recall that I had issues getting this wiring harness unplugged. If you're able to unplug your horn, you can connect them now. Next, we can reconnect our hood latch. You want to angle this dog ear in first, and make sure this ball on the cable is out. It's going to fit in that slot right there and should snap right back in. And then you'll want to make sure that you route it correctly. Let's get this weather stripping out of the way. That can simply be tucked right back in here around the engine compartment. Just like so. Next, the wiring harness. There's going to be 2 of these. One's thin and one's thick. The thin one goes in the thin groove down below. I like to plug them in first before I slide them down there. Make sure they get a good click. Give them a tug. Make sure everything's good. Slip that into there. Looks good. Now we'll connect the other one. And these can only go really one direction. And this one, you kind of got to slide it in and connect it at the same time. You got to click, give it a tug, make sure it's seated in there, and that's all hooked up. I'm going to reconnect the overflow for the radiator. I will go ahead and stick that right back on there. Put it inside the markings, and there we go. Up next, I'm going to install my intercooler air dam on each prospective side. You'll note that there's a place right there to slide those up underneath, and it should snap in down below. The passenger side's a little different. You can see these hooks here. They're going to dog in up top. There's provisions on the aftercooler for those to just slide in that slot right there. There we go. And you can see the clip right there down below. Before I go any further with the intake, I'm going to take this time to change the air filter while all this is still apart. It's not terrible, but I'm going to go ahead and change it so everything's synchronized with the oil change and the timing belt that I just did. I'll be using a genuine Volkswagen Audi air filter. I like to mark the change date on top with the prospective mileage. It should look like that with about, I don't know, less than a 1/4 inch of reveal all the way around. This car, the filter's got kind of a pre-screen. I'm going to go ahead and clean this off. It's a little tricky, but you want your screen to set on top of those dog ears right there. And it should click in just like so. I want to make sure and reinstall this wiring harness here so it's out of the way. Next, we'll install the intake, just like so. It's going to help to put the front of it in first, and then just kind of slide the back of it down into the air box. And like most things on this airbox, these are going to be Phillips head screws as well. You guessed it, it's time for the front grille and bumper. Next, we'll reconnect our wires. And one goes here. Listen for the click, give it a tug. And this one. Right here. Got the click. Give it a little bit of a tug. All right. And we have our windshield washer fluid, which is probably going to spill all over the floor. Not too terribly. And if you watch when we took it apart, you'll recall there's a bolt there and one up above. It takes these 10mm nuts. So I'm going to put those on. And the one on the top is kind of tricky because of the wiring harness that's in the way. But you can scoot it out of the way and you can reach it with a long extension. You're definitely going to need a 10mm deep socket to finish the job. Over here on the passenger side, these are much easier to see. There's one there and one down below. For the remainder of the splash shield guard screws, you're going to need a T25 Torx. Maneuver the plastic back into place. Maybe a little easier where you're at because right here it's below freezing. So we want to get this bumper corner support installed, and you'll notice that right here there are some small tabs, and we need to make sure that those are installed in the corner of the bumper like so. This is just the push pin that we removed previously with our trim removal tool. It's just going to press fit in there. Like so. If everything's centered and installed correctly, this one here should go right in. Plastic push pin install. And that'll be the coup de grace for this. Let's fire it up. First off, I need to check the radiator fluid. But I know that we spilled some fluid and I need to work the air out of it. So we're going to put some G12 antifreeze in there. And yes, I'm going to be using the Audi VW coolant. I'm going to leave the cover off this overflow tank to let it get some of the air out of the system. Let's connect the battery. This will be the moment of truth. Well, the lights work. That's a good sign. No real noises from in there. I think we got our timing belt perfect. Our other belt looks good. I don't see anything dripping underneath. I'm going to let it run for a few minutes here and get up to temperature. Now it's super cold in here. We're well below freezing. They've overfilled it just a little bit with antifreeze, but it's still letting air out. Fans are kicking on. We're getting up to temperature now. Fog lights are working. So there it is. Full timing belt, install, water pump, serpentine belt, even an air filter. We're going to change oil in this, and I'm going to redo the tappet on the fuel pump in a future video. I do want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. And where did I put my tool? I put it up there somewhere, stupid. If you can't get enough LAOL content, consider a channel membership down below.